So Haman has decided to sponsor a plot against the entire Jewish people. Now watch how he sells this to the king. This will show you more confirmation of the theme that we said runs throughout the entire book, which is Achashverosh's insecurity. Verse 8, Haman said to King Achashverosh, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your realm. Their laws are different from every other people's. They do not observe the king's laws, though therefore probably is okay. It is not befitting that the king should tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be recorded that they be destroyed, etc., etc. Now look at the order of the considerations that Haman offers. There's a people that is scattered abroad. Now, the translation here is a little, they're working hard. There are two words, mifuzar, muforad. Mifuzar means scattered, and muforad means really isolated, disconnected among the peoples. The commentators say one is physical scatter, and the other is they have no allies. They're not connected to anybody. They stand alone. Their laws are different from every other people's. And third, they don't obey the king's laws. Isn't it funny that not obeying the king's laws is third? If you want to bring a complaint against a group of people, you want to say it's not worthwhile for the king to allow them to continue to exist, wouldn't the first thing be said? They violate your laws. They're breaking your laws. No, but you see, Achashverosh can't hear that. Okay, maybe they're breaking the laws, but maybe there's justification. Maybe like yesterday, there's a religious exclusion. If I attack them, what's going to happen? Do they have allies? Will people tolerate it? So Haman starts by saying this group has nothing to stand on. They're scattered so that they have no internal cohesion. They have no internal coherence. And they have no allies outside. And people look at them as aliens because their laws and ways of dealing with the world are different from everybody else's. So they have no friends, no one to support them. So already what he's drilled in is, these are people whom you can eliminate without risk. Now, I'll give you a reason to eliminate them. They're not behaving according to your laws. But the very fact that he has to start by describing them as defenseless shows you his understanding of Achashverosh's sensitivity. So, 9, if it pleases the king, let it be recorded they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 silver talents into the hands of those who perform the duties for deposit the king's treasuries. As I told you yesterday, I don't know what to make of this exactly. The king had a banquet in which he showed off his wealth. I told you yesterday that he's showing off his wealth to communicate that he's independent of bribery, that no one can move him. He's not dependent upon other people for his monetary support. For Haman to offer a bribe here is out of touch with the king's reality, and indeed, the king refuses the money. He doesn't take it. So whether Haman has something more subtle in his mind that I'm not aware of, but it's something which would be nice to have an explanation of. So the king took off his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, son of Hamdaz, Agagite, enemy of the Jews. King said to Haman, the silver is given to you. The money, keep the money. So a second. The people also to do with as you see fit. What you have here is standard diplomacy, standard politics. Okay, you have a proposition. Okay, I hear the justification, but do it in your name. Do it in your name. Yeah, use my ring, but do it in your name. That way, the king is protected. If it goes bad, he can always say, well, I gave Haman my ring, the jerk. Look what he did with it. Fool. That's why when the president wants to protect himself, he tells the Secretary of State, you go over there and just say that and see how people react. And if they react favorably, I'll say that I told you to say it. And if they don't react favorably, then I'll say, you said it on your own. He protects himself from responsibility. Rulers do this all the time. They use a middleman to protect themselves. And the king here is following normal political practice to use the middleman. You have the project. Yes, I'm convinced it's a good idea. Otherwise, I wouldn't give you my ring to authorize doing it. But let it come from you. Got a question?
Yeah. Is the silver being offered as a bribe, or is that as payment to the people who killed the Jews? Because it looks like the king's giving the silver to Haman. The silver is given to the people also to do with as you see fit.
No. The money was offered by Haman to the king. Is that not clear?
I will pay 10,000 silver talents into the hands of those who perform the duties.
Keep going.
Deposit into the king's treasury.
It means those people who are assigned to take monetary transactions, they'll take the money and they'll put it in the king's treasuries. It's a deposit for the king's treasuries.
Okay. And then
he says, it's yours. The money's yours. Okay. I don't want your money. Okay. So now, 12. The king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. And the day that's determined was the 13th day of the 11th month. King's secretaries were summoned to the 13th day of the first month, and everything was written exactly as Haman had dictated. The king's satraps, some kind of advisors or servants, the governors of every province, the officials of every people, each province in its own script, each people in its own language. That's the same phraseology that was used for Ahasuerus' decree concerning Vashti, concerning every man ruling in his house. No, it's another political thing. You don't want to take a chance on somebody else translating the king's decree. Who knows how they'll translate it? Who knows how accurate it'll be? No, the king has his own hired translators so that he can supervise that everybody gets exactly what he wants, each people to hear. Each people in his own language. In Ahasuerus' name it was written and it was sealed and signed with the king's signet ring. Now, the following verses are a little difficult to understand. I'll read you through them, and then I'll tell you what the Bible says. It's a little difficult to keep track of exactly what's going on. There is this decree, dictated by Haman, everyone in its own script and language. 13. Letters were sent by courier to all the king's provinces to destroy, slay, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, in a single day. The 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. So the A letter goes out about destruction. Now, the verse 14, when it says copies, is a word in Persian, paschegen. It's not a Hebrew word at all. What it means is not exactly clear. Paschegen aksav, something of the document, were to be promulgated in every province and published to all the peoples, that they should be ready for that day. Letters are sent to the king's provinces, and then something, promulgated means made public. What's made public is they should be ready for that day. If you have a letter that goes out, full page ad in the New York Times, and the 13th of Adar, we're killing all the Jews and we're plundering all their possessions. People will be ready. You don't have to tell them to get ready. They'll be, panting with anticipation for weeks beforehand. No. Something was written, something about being ready for that day. The couriers went forth hurriedly by the order of the king, riders. The edict was distributed in Shushan, the capital. So something now goes up on the wall posters in Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was bewildered. Bewildered? Confused? What would they be bewildered or confused about? This decree to destroy all the Jews, right? Now watch, it gets worse. Mordecai learned of all that had been done, and Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went out to the midst of the city, he cried loudly. Mordecai learned? I mean, if it's on the wall posters all over town, saying that Mordecai learned is a little funny. I mean, everybody knew. Everybody just read the wall posters. The Malbim says that there was a double feature here. There were two documents. One document containing the details of the proposed slaughter went only to the high officials, and it went as a secret document. The reason it was kept secret is because the decree is for 11 months from now. And you don't want to take chance that the Jews will get wind of this, will think of some way to protect themselves, or perhaps bribe somebody and get out of it, or undermine it in some way or other. You don't want the people to know that. So that being the case, you want, well, it's 10 months. I keep saying 11 months. It's 10 months, from the first month to the 11th month. I'm sorry, no, the 12th month. The 12th month. Shneim Asar. Right, this is 11 months. So that was kept secret. The reason why Haman wants it to be sent out now is so that it can't be revoked. The king can't change his mind. As you'll see, that's another law of the kingdom, that once a decree goes out, it can't be revoked. And I'll explain the reason for that in a minute. But on the other hand, he wants something to be known by the public. That also creates a certain inertia. So he sends out and says, 11 months from now, on the 13th of Adar, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Be ready. You know, this modern advertising technique, you know, where the first advertisement comes out and it's unintelligible. You know, it just says sticks and stones, and then it says next month it says next week it says you know, in the rice bowl, and then it says, you know, the football game is going to be there. Please come and support. You know, so and so on. So here something's going up and saying, in 11 months something's going to happen. Be ready. So everybody's thinking, what is it? They're talking about it, but they haven't got a clue what it is. That's what went up in the wall posters in Shushan. The 13th of Adar, 11 months from now, something's going to happen. So the city was bewildered. In particular, this is the capital city. And in capital cities, there are rumors and there are insiders and there are people who are paid to know things and people have friends and connections. And usually in the capital city, you know, there's some idea of what's going on. And here this happens and nobody has a clue. So in particular, in Shushan, there is bewilderment. Now, Mordecai knows the secret document. That's why he puts on sackcloth and ashes, and that's why he tears his clothes and starts wailing through the streets, because he knows the secret document. If the whole document of this impending slaughter had come out, the non-Jews would be celebrating. They'd be celebrating barbecues, you know, drinking parties, and the Jews would be in despair. There wouldn't be bewilderment. There wouldn't be confusion. Everybody would know what the stakes were. So that supports the Malbim's view. Is it very clear in the verses? To me, it's not very clear, but on the other hand, the verses are hard to read. Are we together? Now, I just want to make a small comment. It says in verse 13, letters were sent by courier to all the king's provinces to destroy, slay, and exterminate all Jews, young and old, in a single day. That is the classic formula for destruction. It's very interesting that in the blessing of the Shemona Esrei, where we ask for the downfall of our enemies, we don't use this formula. Shmuel HaKatan, who wrote that blessing in Talmudic times, had this text in front of him. And he specifically chose not to copy this text. So those who are worried about that blessing, there's something to keep in mind. At any rate, chapter 4 is a piece of absolute gold. We have to focus on it and get clear what it says. It's gold in its own, and it has implications, much broader implications. Mordecai learned of all that had been done. Mordecai tore his clothes, sackcloth and ashes, went out to the midst of the city, cried loudly and bitterly. Came to the front of the king's gate until, in English and in Hebrew, until X can mean until up to and not including X, or until can mean up to and including X. It's ambiguous. In Hebrew we say ad v'ad b'chlal, ad v'lo ad b'chlal. For example, if I say a person shall be regarded as a minor until his 20th birthday, that means on his 20th birthday, he's not a minor anymore. That's until, but not including. If you say he shall be hung until dead, that means keep hanging him until he's dead, and then, you know, and the hanging continues on into death. So until is ambiguous. Here, it means until, but not including. You can come up to, but you cannot enter the king's gate when you're wearing sackcloth and ashes. That was a rule of the kingdom. Now, verse 3, in every province where the king's command and his decree extended, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, most of them lying sackcloth and ashes. Now that's in parentheses because it takes time for the riders to get there. A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks as they're going out. Each place they come to, we're telling the story from the point of view of Shushan. We're just telling you that was the typical reaction. Esther's maids, chamberlains, came and told her about it. That is to say, they came and told her that Mordecai is running and screaming through the streets, wailing sackcloth and ashes. The queen was greatly distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai that he might take off sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Mordecai, they're coming from Esquire magazine. They're going to take pictures. You can't look like that. Put on good clothes. That's obviously not the point. What's the point?
She doesn't know.
Come into the palace and tell me what's going on. You can't come in dressed like that. We just saw the law is you can't come into the king's gate and do that. So I'm sending you a change of clothes. Come in and tell me what's going on. And he did not accept them. This little point will be very important in a few minutes. So she's not going to get the information that way. Esther summoned Hasach, one of the king's chamberlains, who appointed to attend her and who was loyal to her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was about and why. Now, in the Hebrew, there is a real redundancy here. Mazeh or al mazeh. Rabbi Eiselman says that her question is a double question, and this is very important from the point of view of Jewish philosophy. Mazeh means what's happening, what's the threat, who are our enemies, what is their complaint, what are the means at their disposal, what are the means at our disposal, what's the social, political, economic, military situation. Al-Mazeh means, what does divine providence want here? What does God want from us? How can we respond to the real challenge? Both questions are crucial. Obviously, if you know the political, the economic, and the military, and you don't know what divine providence wants, you're lost. You're dealing with the superficialities. But the same is true the other way around, because you can't understand the divine providence unless you know the situation on the ground. The divine providence reflects the situation on the ground. So she asks both questions. This becomes a paradigm throughout Jewish history, that when we're faced with challenges, we have to invest in knowing both levels. We cannot simply, so to speak, look into the holy texts and figure out what God wants. You can't do it that way. You got to know the world situation well and take your guidance for what the Torah says. So, Hasach went out to Mordecai in the city square, which was in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him. I don't know why it says happened to him. And about the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the royal treasuries, the annihilation of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the decree which is distributed in Shushan for the destruction, so they might show it to Esther and inform her, bidding her to go to the king, to appeal to him, and plead with him for her people. That's the message. Sach came and told, by the way, when the text says bidding, the Hebrew says command. To command her. That's going to be important also. Hasach came and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Esther told Hasach to return to Mordecai with this message. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces are well aware that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king to the inner court without being summoned, there is but one law for him, that he should be put to death. Except for the person to whom the king shall extend the gold scepter, that he may live. Now, I have not been summoned to come to the king for the past 30 days. I'm going to add a little bit to what she's saying. I think it's just obvious from the context. You're worried about a decree that's signed for 11 months from now. Now look, he's in that inner chamber, and he hasn't called me in 30 days. Either I'm out of favor. Is that a time to go in and ask him for a favor when I'm out of favor? Or he's doing something that's so crucial, so important, he doesn't want to be disturbed. Is that a time to barge in and ask him for a favor? When he gives me the golden scepter, that's already a favor, because otherwise I should be killed. Is it a time to ask for a favor when you've already received a favor? So you need double favor? I mean, this just doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Let's wait. We have time. Time's on our side. Wait until he calls me, he wants me, and then I have leverage, and then I can ask him to save the Jews. That's her response to Mordecai's plea. Yeah.
11, he was explaining what was that? There was 11 months. The first sign was that in 11 months something was going to happen.
Well, this takes place, as the text just said, on the 13th of the first month. First month is Nisan. And the decree is signed to occur on the 13th of Adar, the end of the year.
So when was that? First there was a sign that something's going to happen on the 13th of Adar. And then when was...
Nachbal. The two documents that Haman dictated to be written, the dictating that it should be written was on the 13th of Nisan. Okay? And they were sent out on the 13th of Nisan. And Mordecai found out about it on the 13th of Nisan. Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and was wailing through the streets on the 13th of Nisan. And Esther finds out on the 13th of Nisan what's going on. And Mordecai tells Esther on the 13th of Nisan, go into the king to save the Jews. Now she says, it's today the 13th of Nisan. The decree is signed for the 13th of Adar, 11 months from now. What is your hurry that I should go in today?
There was just a general, that something's going to happen.
So he knew that. He knew the private document. Mordecai got hold of the private document somehow. So he knew the real story. Otherwise he wouldn't have put it on sackcloth and ashes. He wouldn't have been wailing. Well, why should he be wailing? Okay, so now 12. They related Esther's words to Mordecai. And Mordecai said to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you will be able to escape in the king's palace any more than the rest of the Jews. For if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from some other place, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether it was for just such a time as this that you attained the royal position. That's a very difficult speech, for me anyway. First of all, I can't take Mordecai's words simply, literally, exactly, which is my custom. That's the way I like to take words. Because accusing Esther of intending to hide in the palace because nobody knows she's Jewish and just watch while all the Jews are destroyed. That's just too beyond belief. It's too strong. So he's exaggerating here to make a point, which is done in the Tanakh often enough. Even God does it. Exaggerates to make a point. So what's the point? The point is, Mordecai says to Esther, you missed a clear signal that I sent you. You missed a clear signal. You offered me a change of clothes to come into the palace and tell you what's going on. How long would that take? Half hour. And I said no, which means I cannot break off praying, wailing, sackcloth, ashes for even a half hour. That means the situation is desperate now. Otherwise, if I shared your attitude, that's 11 months from now, we're trying to plot strategies, I would have taken off the sackcloth. I would have come to you, we would have discussed it, we would have plotted out a strategy. No, I sent you a signal and you missed it. How come you missed that signal? Because you're in the palace, you lack a certain sensitivity to what's going on with the Jewish people outside. So he exaggerates and says, you don't think you're going to hide in the palace. She never dreamt that she was going to hide in the palace. But he's telling her, you lack a certain sensitivity to what's going on because you are, to a certain extent, detached. I think that's what he's saying. Now he says, if you don't go in, the Jews are going to be saved anyhow. How does he know that? He knows that because the Jews immediately join him. They immediately join him in sackcloth and ashes and wailing and screaming, and as the text testified, not only in Shushan, but every place the promulgation arrived, the Jews immediately responded that way. So Mordecai sees the response of the Jews and he says, once they've taken this attitude, God is going to save us. But you became queen, and you became queen and you've managed to hide your identity. it seems obvious that you are to be the instrument to make this salvation. So your life is on the line. There's a deeper message here, which I may share with you I got from my son. But let's see if we can get how far we can get here. So that's what he says to her. You must go ahead and do this. Now watch her response. Esther said to Mordecai, replied to Mordecai, okay, go assemble all the Jews to be found in Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. 72 hours of fasting. No eating and no drinking. I with my maids will fast also. Then I will go into the king. Then is a little tricky in time. And thus I shall go into the king. We'll see that there's an important point here. Though it's unlawful, and if I perish, I perish. Now let's make a little calculation. This conversation is going on the 13th of Nisan. She says 72 hours, 3 days. So that's the 14th, 15th, and 16th. 15th of Nisan. Anything special about that day? It's the first day of Pesach. First day of Pesach. The night of the 15th is when we have the Pesach Seder. There is a biblical commandment on that night, even outside the land of Israel, with no temple and sacrifices, to eat matzah. So Esther is proposing that the Jews in Shushan, anyway, should skip the mitzvah of matzah that year. Is that obviously a good thing to do? Obviously the right thing to do. 17, which your translator delicately translates, Mordecai then left and did exactly as Esther commanded him. In the Hebrew it is Mordecai crossed over. By Avor Mordecai. He crossed over and did what Esther commanded him. One of the commentators says the palace was surrounded by a moat. So he went over the bridge, over the moat. Okay, could be. Another midrash says the following. When Esther says to Mordecai, fast for me 3 days and nights, Mordecai sends back and says, what are you talking about? We have the mitzvah of matzah to do. You're suggesting that we should fast and skip the mitzvah? We're trying to do this to please God. And how are you going to please God? By violating one of his commandments. And she sends back and says, and if Haman is successful, who will eat matzah next year? There won't be any Jews next year. Meaning, Esther sends back to Mordecai, I think you missed your own signal. You send me a signal that it's crucial now, life or death now, success or destruction now, 11 months early. You couldn't take off your clothes for a half hour. When I suggested delay, you said, you can't delay. Right now, everything's being decided. Well, if right now everything's being decided, then that calls for drastic measures. And I think this is the drastic measures that we need. And Mordecai crosses over his own judgment to do what Esther said to do. What I think you see here is an exquisite complementarity between a man and a woman. According to some of our sources, they were married. As we said yesterday, husband and wife. This is an exquisite complementarity. She missed his signal. When he points it out, she gives in to him and does according to him. He misses her signal, or he misses her repeat of his signal. And when she points it out, he gives in and does according to what she says. The success comes from the fact that you have a man and a woman, each one having an individual perception and sensitivity, and each one crediting the other and giving in to the other. And the language is even parallel, because when Mordecai talks to Hasach to give the message to Esther, he says to command her. And in 17, it says that Mordecai did everything that she commanded him. It's even equal in commanding. He commands her and she commands him. And they accept each other's commands. I think this is absolutely exquisite in terms of painting a picture between husband and wife. Already get it so far? Okay, now, there is an ambiguity about, I'll tell you this, I don't know if we're going to get to the text tomorrow, how far we're going to get. 3 days. She says 3 days to support me in going in. When does she go in? does she go in on the third day of the fast or after the third day of the fast, on the fourth day? The text is ambiguous. We read either way. And the commentators are split. The question is, one of them seems to make a lot more sense than the other one. What would you say intuitively? Which makes more sense, that she should go in on the third day of the fast, or she should go in on the day after the fast is over?
The day of the fast.
Third day of the fast. That's the height of the fast. The moment of most, dedication, everything else. This is the third day. 3 days fast, it comes over, night comes, time for pizza and beer, let's, and then the next day she goes in. Very, very funny idea. Oh, I'm sorry. I spoke incorrectly. So let's make it. Let me make it. I have to put in some more details. She has a 2-day strategy. What she does is, when she makes her first appearance, she goes in, and the king says, "What do you want?" And she says, "I want you to come to a banquet. You and Haman come to a banquet that I'm making for you today." And they come. And the king at the banquet says, "What do you want?" And she says, "I want you to come to a banquet again tomorrow, second day banquet. And there, I'm going to do something the king wants me to do." And that's when she pleads for the Jewish people, on the second day of the banquet. So it's a 2-day project here. Now the question is, how are the 2 days related to the 3 days of fasting? One idea is that the first banquet is on the second day of fasting. The second banquet is on the third day of fasting. The second banquet is where she says, "I'm a Jew, and my people that are threatened," and she pleads with him to save the Jewish people. And that, I think, makes the most obvious intuitive sense. At the moment when you're asking for the Jewish people to be saved, you should be at the height of your dedication to God and connection and sacrifice and all the rest. The other shot is, the first banquet is on the third day of fasting, and the second banquet, where she says, "I'm a Jew and please save the Jewish people," is the day after all the fasting. That seems to be the crucial moment to ask the king to save the Jews, and that comes out now to be after the fasting is over on the following day. And that's hard to understand. That view, that the first time she goes in is the third day of fasting, and when she asks to save the Jewish people, it's after the fasting is all over, that point of view is that getting in is the crucial success. It's either get killed at the doorway or get in. If she gets in, she knows it's a success. She knows it's a success. After all, the king is not an independent agent. The real interaction here is between the Jewish people and God. The question is to get a favorable acceptance by God. Once that takes place, she knows it's over. The king has a golden scepter. Gold, in our symbolism, is the attribute of strict judgment. It's the attribute from which punishment comes, destruction comes. If she appears in the doorway, king sees her and he extends to her the golden scepter, and she touches it and thereby lives. That means that the attribute of strict justice, the attribute of punishment, has already been satisfied and is willing to accept her. Once that happens, all the rest is aftermath. So that's, if you take the chronology that way, that's how you understand it. Are we together so far? I'll share with you something that my oldest son, who's working on certain projects with certain very important people, said about this. Our sources paint Esther in the palace of Ahasuerus as a gigantic tzaddikus, a very righteous, pious person. Even though she was Jewish, nobody knew it. How could she keep it a secret? One thing she did is she ate only beans, so as to be sure that there were no problems of kashrus. She had 7 maids. Each one served her on a different day, because that meant when so-and-so came in the door, she knew it was Shabbos. And if she had any problem keeping track of the week, and she made sure not to do anything that would violate Shabbos. She was faithful to Mordecai. He told her not to reveal. She didn't reveal. She had many merits. Mordecai says to her, "If you don't go into the king, you and your whole house will be destroyed." that means there can be a particular challenge. And that challenge is so central that no matter what other merits you have, they won't suffice. They won't be enough. Because this is the crucial need, and if you fail at this, your other merits won't help you. Now, there are times in history when the leaders of the generation say, this is the crucial challenge. If this challenge is met, you'll be successful. If it isn't met, you won't be successful, no matter what else you're doing. You could be supporting Shabbos and the study of Torah and kosher food and all the rest. But if you don't meet this challenge, then the whole thing will go down the drain. And there are those who have a whole program concerning the challenges of our generation. But he brings a raya from here. It's a very striking statement. Given the oral tradition's lavish description of her righteousness and her faithfulness to everything that Judaism thinks is important, to say, if you don't go in, you're going to be lost, means that there can be something that's so important that overwhelms everything else. Yeah.
Assuming that the theory about Mordecai and Esther being married is accurate, wouldn't that mean that her relationship with the king was breaking the rule on adultery?
Okay. So the easy way out here is to take the position which some of the medieval commentators take, in particular Tosfos takes, that if the woman is passive, then she is not required to give up her life rather than commit adultery. It's only when the woman takes an active role that she's required to give up her life rather than commit adultery. So then this becomes a case like many cases where, yes, you are performing the transgression, but you are allowed to perform the transgression in order to save your life. And indeed, that is what one ought to do. According to some, you're not even allowed to volunteer to die because your life is more important. The Rambam takes that attitude. So here, that's one of the reasons we stressed yesterday that everything was done, she did in reaction. She didn't initiate anything. He wants. Okay, let him do what he wants. But she didn't initiate anything. Okay. So now, I'll just say one more thing though for today. So, chapter 5. Came to pass on the third day. So the question is, what does the third day mean? This now when she goes in for the first time, for the first banquet. So it could be the third day from the day we've been talking about. We've been talking about the 13th of Nisan. The fast is 14, 15, and 16. The third day from the 13th, if you count the 13th, is the 14th and the 15th. That's the second day of the fasting. Or the third day could be the third day of the fasting, which would be the 16th. That's how you get the ambiguity. Don royalty stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's house, while the king was sitting on his throne in the throne room, facing the chamber's entrance. When the king noticed Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. He accepts her. Now, by the way, there's archaeological remains of this picture of the king sitting in this small room with the 6-foot scepter in his hand. So, the description here is quite accurate. I mentioned to you yesterday, or was it last night? That was last night. We have a tradition that whenever the Megillah uses the word king without the name, without saying King Achashverosh, that the word king refers to both the flesh and blood fellow sitting on the throne and also to God, the king. So here, it doesn't mention Achashverosh's name. So she knows this is a double interaction, like I told you before. And when the flesh and blood king holds out the golden scepter, she knows that she's getting recognition from above as well. That's the crucial moment. And then from then on, it's just aftermath, cleanup. King said to her, "What is it for you, Queen Esther, and what is your petition?" This double question is repeated over and over again, consistently with the same vocabulary, and it has a double meaning. The next one, it uses the word she'elah. He's asking her two questions. Is this something personal? Is it something that you want or you need? And secondly, is it a petition? That means, does it have social and political consequences? What are we talking about now? And he says, even if it be half the kingdom, it shall be granted to you. That's on the petition. If it's a personal thing, it has nothing to do with half the kingdom. But if it's social, political, then if it be half, I'll give it to you. Meaning, don't upset stability. Don't go over halfway. Things have to be stable. There's a limit to how far I'll go for you, even for you, if it has social and political consequences. And he says this over and over again to her. Again, warning her, I have to worry about social and political consequences. Don't go too far. So she says, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for it. King commanded, tell Haman to hurry and fulfill Esther's wish. King and Haman came to the banquet that Esther prepared. And here the motivation is pretty transparent. The commentators pointed out. Why would she invite Haman? Wants to please the king, wants to butter him up, wants to get to the point where she can ask him for saving the Jewish people. What's Haman got to do with it? To create suspicion. Create suspicion. I don't know much about ancient history and ancient potentates, but someone, for example, like Stalin, every few years he murdered all of his closest advisors. Don't let anybody get too far in. People who are close advisors build up their own independent power base. They know too much. They can sell favors. So here, she's inviting Haman. That stimulates a bit of suspicion in his mind. Why is she inviting Haman? Okay, he's prime minister, but so what? At any rate, they come to the banquet. Now, just one more thing to point out. The king said to Esther during the wine feast, what is your request? It shall be granted to you. What is your petition? Even if half the kingdom be fulfilled. You see? A double thing. Request, Sheila, that's personal. Personal, you want a castle by the sea, golden doors, okay, whatever you want. Perfectly all right. Petition? No, be careful. Don't destabilize the kingdom. She says, my request and my petition. Yes, I have a request and a petition. She's answering him. Vocabulary is very precise here. Something for me personally, and there is something vis-a-vis the kingdom. If I have won the king's favor, if it pleases the king to grant my request and perform my petition, she knows very well what her position is. She's there because she's pretty and because she pleases the king. She doesn't say, I'm speaking in the name of justice, I'm speaking in the name of values, I'm speaking in the names of the prophet of the kingdom. No, I have no judgment, I have no evaluation, I have no principles. I hope it will please the king to do me a favor. Let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I prepared for them, and tomorrow I will do the king's bidding. That's a mysterious statement. Do the king's bidding? What did he bid her? What did he tell her to do? So here the commentators say this is a reference to the long-standing point of friction between them. The king doesn't know who she is. He doesn't know who she is. And when they got married, he had amnesty for the provinces, and he gave gifts to get everybody to talk about it, and nobody came up with it. And then he gathered virgins into the capital another time to signal to her, listen, your position is precarious, maybe I'll get a new queen, and she doesn't budge. She says, I know that you've been worried about this. Tomorrow I'm going to do your bidding and tell you who I am. She's got to, because otherwise she can't plead on behalf of the Jewish people. But this, so to speak, whets his appetite. Wow. After this years-long peeve that I've had, I can't get over it because she charms me, but after this years-long peeve, tomorrow I'm going to finally find out who she is. And of course, tomorrow he's going to find out who she is in spades. Right? Okay.